So, Jenny, may we start with you
Yes.
and your 3 books?
So I went with a crime theme, and I'm going to actually go, as it happens, in chronological order, starting with Agatha Christie. Obviously, as we all know, Agatha Christie wrote many books, and this is, in my opinion, her best. I haven't read all of them, but I'm interested. I'm fascinated by whodunits and sort of what makes a whodunit work. And in a way, it feels like there are many boxes that you need to check to have a successful whodunit. One is, obviously, is the killer a surprise, but not just that, because ideally, before we get to that surprise, we fall through what I've sort of come to think of as a series of trap doors. People that we think are the killer, and then boom, we fall through that, and then we think it's this one, and boom, we fall through that. So achieving that, and then the final surprise is really important. But in a way, the even harder thing that I think is so rare for a whodunit to achieve is to have enough kind of psychological acuity that we actually want to reread it. I mean, think about it. How many times do you ever want to reread a whodunit? Very seldom. This one, I think, actually achieves all of those things. I can't say too much about it, of course, because it's the nature of a whodunit that you have to be pretty mum in describing the plot. But what I will say is that it's a Poirot mystery, and he comes in as a sort of unexpected element. He's a sort of next door neighbor who gets involved in trying to solve the crime. And it's told in the first person. It has a wonderful kind of narrative voice. It's one of her early books, and the one that I've enjoyed the most of all of hers.
That sounds good. I love that, the complexity of the plot, because now these days when half the shows I see on Netflix that are meant to be whodunit mysteries, I finish it and I'm like, why did I just waste? It feels like it was written in about a day. The plot, the ending makes no sense. They cannot land it. So this sounds terrific.
Well, the thing is that I think that can happen really easily, because to find someone who hasn't been a suspect, someone that the reader hasn't thought of, how do you hit that amazing mix of surprise and inevitability? And in a way, it's a challenge that I think one has with any work of fiction, but it is crystallized in the whodunit, because if it's too far afield, you have surprise, but it's nonsense. So the inevitability is missing. If you have too much inevitability, it's exactly who the reader thought was the killer. So very hard to pull it off.
Is this one of the ones where she uses the setting as kind of a device, like the 10 Little Indians are on an island, or Murder on the Orient Express are all on a train? She often puts them in a place where they are sort of trapped and it's all happening.
It is in a stately home, but they are not entirely trapped. And I think that's one reason I really like it, because I find those kind of entrapment settings to be a little too much like door A, door B, or door C. This is in a community. And I think maybe, actually, I hadn't thought of it. That, I think, is why I like it better than a lot of those famous ones, which, of course, work so well for a movie because you've got everyone in one place. But to me, that insularity on the page often results in a kind of almost a mathematical kind of dryness. And this has more color to it. And a lot of humor as well. So anyway, so that is, I highly recommend. Number 2 is Chester Himes, A Rage in Harlem. So wonderful crime writer. He actually did write whodunits, but this is not a whodunit. But his novels all take place in Harlem. He was writing in the 40s and the 50s. He was a very successful writer. And in fact, he had been imprisoned for many years for a crime that he, did commit. But he began writing in prison and became very successful after he got out. He has a pair of detective police officers who are African-American and working in Harlem. Their position is very tricky because they are policing their own community. What I love about A Rage in Harlem, I will also say for audiobook lovers, Samuel Jackson is the narrator of the audiobook of this, and he is dynamite. This is actually a comic crime novel that also has elements of horror. It's quite grotesque in moments, sort of hilariously grotesque. And what I really love about it is that the grotesqueness is very unexpected, as is the comedy. So what Himes does is he sort of sets up a series of expectations which are that this is going to be a kind of light-hearted book. It feels like it's sort of silly in a way because it involves a guy who is a very gullible protagonist who is immediately fleeced of money by people who tell him that they can turn $10 bills into $100 bills by putting them into an oven and sort of turning it on. It's called The Blow. And the idea, and unfortunately, of course, what ends up happening is that he loses all of his $10 bills. And he works in a funeral parlor. So he, in his wild efforts to try to reclaim this money, he ends up stealing from his boss and sort of getting deeper. He gambles and loses. He gets deeper and deeper and deeper into trouble. And it feels as though nothing can really go wrong here because he's such a lovable figure, but he also has an identical twin brother who is a heroin addict who dresses up as a nun and raises money on the street for the Sisters of Mercy in drag. And so he enlists his brother to help him, and wildness ensues. It's a very short novel, and it is a wonderful kind of wild ride. The last thing I'll say about it, and the really unexpected part of it, is that in this kind of comic, crazy world, what ultimately emerges very unexpectedly is some pretty searing social commentary about life in Harlem. And so it's a kind of stealth manifesto almost, which never appears as such, but leaves us with a really strong impression of racial injustice, but it's delivered with sheer delight. That's a lot to do in one book. Yeah. Number 3, published in 1981, A Flag for Sunrise by Robert Stone. Nice. One of my favorite writers. I feel like he has been a bit eclipsed. He died in 2015, and I don't hear his books talked about very much, and I would love to have that change. I think he really was a wonderful writer. This is also a crime novel of sorts, but Stone has a kind of approach that he uses in many of his books, which is that he follows several different points of view as various individuals converge in a kind of climactic, violent situation. And the setting for this is a fictional Latin American country on the verge of revolution. And we have gun runners approaching there with ammunition hidden in a shrimp boat. We've got a kind of psychotic Coast Guard service member who has resigned, killed his dogs, and left his child, and we don't know what is going on with him. We've got a nun who is part of the revolutionary process, and a sort of anthropologist who finds himself in the middle of all this. It feels of its moment in the best way. So published in 81, what we really feel is the presence of the Vietnam War still in a way that we don't really feel the weight of that today in the same way. It certainly comes across as raising questions about American interventions. But finally, as with any really good book, it's just exciting and full of, what I think of as Stone's signature element are just these wonderful set pieces. There's a moment where the anthropologist dives under a coral reef and sort of feels the presence of some tremendous darkness, some sort of shadow of danger, and we don't know if it's sort of natural or supernatural or just psychological. And the scene of the gun runners who end up employing the kind of psychopathic ex-Coast Guard guy, who ends up being very attracted to the wife of the couple and the gun runners. You can imagine. Exciting stuff. Really recommend it.
These are all. Do you remember when you first read these, or when these were first introduced to you somehow?
A Flag for Sunrise, I think I read not long after it came out. I think I read it. I sort of arrived in New York in 87, I think already a Stone fan. So I read that sort of contemporaneously with its publication. Chester Himes I read in the last few years because I've gotten very interested in crime fiction, and I actually taught it a year ago at the University of Pennsylvania in a literature course I was teaching, and that was a lot of fun. Actually, it was a interesting book to teach in a literature course, but also a way to think about genre and the ways what genre, how it works, how it sort of sets up certain things that we know will happen, and then in a way the success of a genre novel lies in how in what ways it can kind of surprise us despite those rules. And then Ackroyd, I think I read that actually also in the last 5 years. I had read many Agatha Christie's, and this was one I hadn't read, and I just loved it.
Well, these are terrific. Thank you. By the way, as your lists were coming in, I realized I'm 0 for 9 on all these books. I haven't read anything, so I'm excited for my list has gotten massive now of books to read.
I agree about Robert Stone that he should be more read. He was actually a pretty good friend of mine, and I first got hooked on Dog Soldiers.
Yeah, that was
It's a really good book.
I think the prior novel, but
yeah. And his first was A Hall of Mirrors.
His books are, they're like on the verge of being really literary thrillers, but they're not whodunits. They're just suspenseful and violent and scary.
Yeah.
Any book to film on these?
I don't know, actually. I think I wouldn't be surprised.
Dog Soldiers was made into a film.
Dog Soldiers has been. I don't know about A Flag for Sunrise. I wouldn't be surprised if all of them have been, but obviously not successfully enough that we know about it. But I think they may all have made it to the screen in one form or another. I know a number of Himes novels, I think, did.